Hi, I'm James. Normally what I do is a video essay series here on this YouTube channel that you're currently watching, where I examine Western movies and kind of look at them in the context of the genre and just generally talk about films I like. Normally those are pretty heavily scripted, pretty time intensive, and today what I thought I'd do is just do a more casual, laid-back, improvisatory video where I just list off 5 Westerns that I like and tell you some things about them and try and encourage you to watch them. So let's see how that goes. Not great at this whole being on a camera thing. Probably going to be a bit stiff together. Like, we can get through this, I think. I hope. Maybe. We'll see. If you're, say, agnostic about the idea of classic Hollywood films, and Westerns in particular, these are films that I think might surprise you with their more modern sensibilities. I think we tend to think of old movies as being very stiff, but I think these are films that, in their values and in their aesthetics, have a kind of more contemporary feel than I think you might expect. The first film I want to tell you about is Canyon Passage, which is a 1946 film by Jacques Tourneur. Tourneur is a director who's not best known for his westerns. Most people probably know him because of his great contributions to the noir and horror genres. He made Cat People, one of the seminal horror films of all time, which kind of invented a lot of the tropes and techniques of modern horror. And he also made Out of the Past, which is perennially considered to be one of the best film noirs of all time. Film noirs or films noir? I think it's films noir, but sounds pretty weird. But yeah, he also made a number of westerns. Notably, he made a series of collaborations with the actor Joel McCrea. These included Wichita, Stranger on Horseback, and he also made Stars in My Crown, which is a quasi-western that's got these kind of pacifistic, Christian, anti-racist messages in it. But for my money, his best western was his first, Canyon Passage. Canyon Passage is sort of an unusually structured film. It's not got a clear-cut narrative in the sense that a lot of other westerns might, where you have a hero who's going on a journey and it's fairly straightforward. This is really kind of more of a rambly, episodic film that's generally about a community of people living in the West. We've got this kind of very surly protagonist called Logan, played by Dana Andrews, who almost on a meta level seems uncomfortable with the idea that he is a Western protagonist. He kind of wants to avoid conflict and keep to himself and be his own man. The film focuses on the series of overlapping love triangles. You have Logan, who's in love with Lucy, played by Susan Hayward, who happens to be engaged to George, who's Logan's best friend. George is played by Brian Donlevy. Is it Donlevy or Donlevy? Who frequently appears in westerns playing this kind of like shifty kind of gambler figure who is more or less sympathetic depending on the film you're watching. And here he's kind of middle sympathetic, kind of a bit of an asshole. So there's clear sexual tension between Logan and Lucy, which does not go unnoticed by George.
Could you do better?
In a more conventional film, like, this might be the central conflict of the plot. However, George doesn't seem, like, overly bothered by it. The reason for this is that he happens to be in love with Marta, who's the wife of the guy who runs a local gambling house, which is where George is losing all of his money. Marta doesn't seem to have any reciprocal interest in him, but George is just kind of hopelessly and somewhat pathetically pursuing her.
You're always reading things in the way I look at you.
Meanwhile, Logan is courting a woman called Caroline, who his employee, who's called Vane Blazier, which is the greatest name of all time and is sort of wasted on kind of a nothing character, is in turn in love with her.
It's her choice. You're not the man for her.
So there's a whole mess of characters, all of whom seem to be in love with the wrong person, and all of whom seem to just kind of be resigned to the fact that they're going to end up with someone that they don't love. This is not a film that's full of danger and excitement where passions are running high. Instead, it sort of seems to meander lazily along. Much like the character High, played by Hoagie Carmichael, who sort of seems to just drift in and out of the film on his little donkey, playing his mandolin and singing songs.
Can't you hear the killdeer song?
The songs being one of the high points of the film.
Oh, buttermilk sky, can't you see my little donkey and me? We're as happy as a Christmas tree, heading for the one I love.
The film has an interesting sort of quasi-philosophical bent to it. Characters are always speaking in these existential aphorisms.
What's your idea of a friend? Any man, I suppose, who believes as I do that the human race is a horrible mistake.
In part, the film is about why we value what we do.
A man can choose his own gods, Cornelius. What are your gods?
What?
Logan is constantly trying to expand his trading business, and yet he doesn't seem to really care about gold or possessions or the things that can be bought with his success.
Gold is only yellow gravel, Cornelius.
But the yellow color makes all the difference.
Butter's yellow too, and you can spread it on bread.
The act of doing the thing is its own reward.
You're never happy except when you're on the go.
I guess I'm just stuck on this Oregon. Or maybe I'm just ambitious. I want to see a Stewart and Company pack outfit stringing along every road.
Meanwhile, there's High's mandolin, which for him has great sentimental value.
Trade you for that.
Oh, no, not my Mandy.
But the Indian who takes it can only see the use he can get out of its strings. One of the best scenes in the film is when the entire community comes together to do a cabin raising for a couple that's just moved into the territory.
I just can't get over it. All these people coming from miles around, people we don't even know.
It's a really gorgeously shot and realised sequence that really seems to be a kind of loving expression of what a community can and perhaps should be. And it's kind of interesting the ways in which during this sequence, the central characters link into the background. Logan's just one of many people who happen to be working on the house. The camera doesn't linger on him or make him out to be somehow special. The viewpoints and experiences of these people who chose to come out into the wilderness and strike out a new life for themselves.
And may they prosper and live in peace all the days of their life.
It's something that the film takes great pains to explore, perhaps more so than many of its other contemporaries. The film does have a villain, a guy called Honey Bragg, played by Ward Bond, who sort of seems vaguely aware that he is the villain of the film, and doesn't seem to have any kind of motivations beyond just a nihilistic desire for destruction. The rest of the community seems to recognise Logan as some kind of potential leader and want him to fight Honey.
Bragg's up at Stetchel's.
They're all expecting you up there.
You might as well go. Town won't have it any other way.
But Logan himself seems, if anything, disgusted by the community's own bloodlust.
Why didn't you kill him?
That'd have been more fun, Lucy. That's what you all came for, isn't it?
There's this kind of real ambivalence in the film towards the community. On the one hand, really welcoming, as we see in the cabin raising sequence, but the other hand, bloodthirsty and cruel and parochial, given to mob violence and resentment. One of Canyon Passage's great high points is its cinematography. Its location filming, its sense of place. The colour palettes, though restricted to just greens and browns for the most part, are incredibly evocative and kind of have this texture to them that really makes you feel as if you could just step right into the world of the film. The rain in the opening sequence is as visceral as any piece of weather I've ever seen. Tourneur's direction is incredible throughout the film. He's one of those directors who's great at letting the camera hang back and manoeuvring your eyes around the frame using the movement of the characters. One moment that's particularly well staged is a kiss between Logan and Caroline. We get to see the effects of this kiss ripple out across the rest of the characters, who respond alternately with both joy and jealousy.
Logan. Why, that's great.
The trouble with this film is it's mainly good because of its vibes. It's just got like really, really good vibes. You gotta take my word for it. Just watch this movie, okay? Hey, that's it. We're done talking about Canyon Passage. Next film. The next film I want to talk about is Wagon Master, which is by the great director John Ford, who's normally considered to be one of, if not the greatest director of westerns of all time. Ford's obviously best known for making films like Stagecoach, The Searchers, and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Wagon Master, certainly at the time of its release, was one of his lesser regarded works. It didn't make nearly as much money in the box office as some of the films he was making around the same time, largely because it didn't have the star power of John Wayne, who he was in the middle of a multi-film collaboration with, and likewise it was largely ignored and neglected by critics on release. However, over the years it's become regarded as one of Ford's best films, and it was a personal favourite of Ford himself, although it still remains a lot less seen than films like The Searchers and Stagecoach. Wagon Master is about two young horse traders, played by Ben Johnson and Harry Carey Jr., who get roped into guiding a Mormon wagon train through the treacherous southwestern desert. The Mormons are led by Elder Wiggs, played by Ward Bond, who despite being the senior member of the group, also seems to be someone who's only come to Mormonism late in life, after his so-called sinning days, and is given to yelling and swearing, something that the other members of the group look down upon.
Well, I'll be dead blasted all bears paws at him. $50 a head. Why, that's enough to make the Lord himself please.
Wagon Master is part of a long-running subgenre of films about wagon trains taking people out west. These films often focused on the immense difficulty of traversing the American landscape. Wagon Master is about how various disparate groups of outsiders come together to form sort of an uneasy community with one another. To start with, you have the horse traders, Sandy and Travis, who are viewed with suspicion by the authorities in the town that they enter at the beginning of the film.
Horse trader? Yep.
The Mormons, meanwhile, are also victims of disdain and discrimination, seemingly everywhere they go.
We're gonna have to leave this hospitable community at exactly 7:30. $7 you better get a moving.
Indeed, Travis decides to take the wagon train on, specifically because the marshal refers to him and Sandy with the same derisive tone that he refers to the Mormons.
Mormons, Cleggses, show folks, horse traders. I'm in.
And it's almost as if Travis starts to feel a sense of solidarity with them as a fellow outcast. Along the way, the group run into a snake oil salesman and his retinue, which seems to include 2 either former or current sex workers. And while the Mormons reject them at first because of their conservative religious beliefs,
Don't think we ought to take up with their kind of people, Elder.
Travis insists on taking them along.
I'm not leaving them now, and that's flat.
And so Wagon Master kind of continues on as this gentle humanistic comedy of errors about these disparate sets of people gradually learning to understand one another. Until the Cleggs arrive, a vicious group of bandits who take the wagon train hostage. The fact that the film has been so gentle up to this point makes the possibility of violence from the Cleggs seem that much more serious and real. A little FYI, to anyone who ever wants to record like anything ever, a great time not to record things that involve audio is like the day before like bonfire night. A big part of this film's charm is Ben Johnson's role as Travis, the leader of the wagon train. Ben Johnson was both a stuntman and an actor who played bit parts in a number of John Ford films around this time. Johnson is an absolutely incredible physical actor. He was known for his talent as a stunt rider and frequently competed in horse riding competitions. And seeing him in the brief horse chase scene there is in the film is an absolutely beautiful thing to behold. He's also especially great in his scenes with Joanna Drew, who plays Denver.
Man could make an awful nice little cattle ranch in that valley. Yeah, if he didn't mind being lonesome. And had someone to kind of help him with the cooking and such.
The gently budding romance between the two characters is one of the most poignant and beautiful in any Western film. John Ford's Westerns are often known for having these very extended dance sequences, which reveal a lot about the societies in which they take place. And Wagon Master is no exception, with 3 different dance scenes in the film. The first is a jubilant celebration that happens once the wagon train finds water, and demonstrates how the group of disparate outcasts is starting to become cohesive, yet is interrupted by the Cleggs. The second dance sequence is beautiful in a deeply strange way. The wagon train is approached by a band of Navajo, and rather than it turning into a big gunfight, the film subverts our expectations. Once the Navajo realize that the group is composed mostly of Mormons, they seem to feel a kinship with them, again perhaps a sense of solidarity amongst the dispossessed.
Says the Mormons are his brothers. Says they're not big thieves like most white men. Just little thieves.
Oh, he's right. Complimentary, ain't he?
And they invite them to their camp for a dance. Then we get the gently comical side of the tense Mormons participating in a culture that is not their own. However, the circular movement of the dance echoes back to the dance that the horse traders and Mormons were doing earlier in the film, which seems almost to indicate that there's something universal being enacted by these 2 disparate cultures through the practice of dancing. Although somewhat neglected at the time, Wagon Master has proved to have quite a legacy. The long-running TV show Wagon Train was heavily inspired by the film, and also cast as its lead one of the main actors from Wagon Master, Ward Bond. Ben Johnson would also find acclaim later in his career when director and John Ford fanboy Peter Bogdanovich cast him in The Last Picture Show in the 1970s. His performance in the film won him an Oscar, a BAFTA, and a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor. The next film I want to talk about is Apache Drums from 1951, directed by Argentinian director Hugo Fregonese. I'm like 90% sure that's how it's pronounced at least. The film was produced by Val Lewton, who is known as a hands-on producer, and is often credited as being the auteur behind many of the films he worked on. He's perhaps best known for collaborating with Jacques Tourneur, the director of Canyon Passage, on the film Cat People. Lewton was primarily well known for his work in the horror genre, and indeed, Apache Drums is something of a horror-western hybrid. Apache Drums starts by introducing us to the town of Spanish Boot. As the town has grown more prosperous, it's been decided that the bad elements ought to be driven out, and so Sam Lee, the protagonist, who's a gambler and gunfighter, is asked to leave by the mayor.
You're leaving town. That's all right with me. There's no room for a man of my capacities in Spanish Boot.
As are the inhabitants of the local brothel. However, shortly after leaving town, Sam finds the brothel workers slain by a rogue band of Apache, and he rides back to warn the town that they are on the warpath.
The Mescalero Indians are over the border. They bushwhacked Betty and her girls in Gamo Pass.
Only to be disbelieved and persecuted once he arrives.
Throw him out! Throw him out! Ride him out on a rail! Yeah!
After a lot of setup, the film rapidly changes tone around the halfway mark, when suddenly all of the inhabitants in the town are forced to hide in the church as the Apache attack. From this point on, the film less resembles a western and more a zombie horror, preceding the works of George Romero. The film also very much seems to have been an influence on John Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13. Given the film's age and B-movie status, it's quite easy to let your guard down during the first half, especially since some of the action scenes look somewhat stilted. However, the violence and horror of the second half can be genuinely shocking at moments. There's obviously something deeply, deeply problematic about presenting the Apache as these kind of monstrous, zombie-like figures who just desire to kill. And on some level, I do think that this is probably fundamentally indefensible. However, I do think the film does some interesting things to contextualize its portrayal of the Apache. The film begins with a voiceover apparently by an Apache.
The white men from the north and the white men of Mexico have drawn a line across the middle of the land that feeds us. We cannot go south to eat of the mezcal, nor north to eat of the piñon. The hunger wolf chews on our strength. Soon the warriors will be too weak to fight.
I think guilt is often a very intrinsic element of horror. The idea that something is out there trying to kill you is scary, but the idea that something is out there trying to kill you and you deserve it is all the scarier. In some sense, I think Apache Drums, in addition to foreshadowing the zombie genre, also seems to be foreshadowing the trope that would appear often in later horror films, where some kind of haunting would take place on a Native American burial ground, leveraging colonial guilt to enhance the horror.
The site is supposed to be located on an Indian burial ground, and I believe they actually had to repel a few Indian attacks as they were building it.
The film also has a sympathetic Apache character in the form of Pedro Pita, a cavalryman who helps defend the town. And the townspeople's racist reactions to him are clearly framed as wrong.
I put my hand on the white man's book. I fight for the white man.
What is an oath to an Indian?
A great deal more than to most white men.
In the second half of the film, when all the characters are confined to the church, we repeatedly see the town's reverend talk in incredibly racist and disparaging terms about the Apache.
They're not praying. It's only an excuse to kill.
However, the cavalry captain, who's also trapped there, and who also happens to be the friend and commander of Pedro Pita, will often proffer alternate explanations for the Apache's behaviour.
Like other beasts, an Indian can see in the dark.
He can't see in the dark any more than you can. He used his head, his good human intelligence.
There's a certain extent to which I think you can dismiss this as a sort of hand-waving attempt to get away with the otherwise racist depiction of the Apache. However, I do think there is an interesting concept at play here, where a group of people is presented as utterly alien and monstrous, and yet we are made aware that they only appear so because of the limited perspective that we have on them. So the next film we're going to talk about is The Tall T from 1957, Directed by Bud Boetticher, the film is part of the so-called Renown Cycle, a series of collaborations between Boetticher, the star Randolph Scott, and the producer Harry Joe Brown. After the success of Boetticher and Scott's film 7 Men From Now, the three men teamed up to make a series of westerns which include great films like Ride Lonesome, Buchanan Rides Alone, and Comanche Station. This series of films is often considered to be amongst the best ever produced in the Western genre. They generally tend to centre around a hero played by Randolph Scott, who's obsessively pursuing some kind of quest, usually for revenge. These characters tend to be the most iconic, pared down versions of the archetypal Western hero. The Tortilla is probably my favourite of these films, and it stands out quite a bit from the others, namely because Scott's character, rather than being this iconic, larger-than-life hero, is actually more of a regular person. Scott's character, Pat Brennan, ends up being kidnapped, along with a wealthy couple, by a group of vicious bandits, led by Frank Usher, played by Richard Boone.
Driver, you got anything down that boot, you'd best hand haul it out here.
The rest of the film follows Brennan's attempts to keep himself and his fellow hostage, Mrs. Mims, alive.
It'll take both of us working together to stay alive.
Oh, but they said they'd let us go.
I think they'd do that.
The film really displays Boetticher and Scott both at the height of their powers. There's some incredible line readings from Scott in this movie.
You know what's gonna happen to you?
I think so.
You scared?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Boetticher's signature style suits the story perfectly. He often frames scenes with a lot of negative space, and has the characters move very slowly, often meaning at any one time that a large amount of the frame is still. Rather than making the film feel boring and staid, instead it adds to the tension. We're often acutely aware of the amount of physical space between Brennan and his captors, and so all of that negative space becomes pregnant with the possibility of action. There's a wonderful moment where Scott simply sits on a tree branch, and the way he does so is somehow casual, deeply awkward, and also weirdly seductive. Ostensibly, a plot hole in the film is why are they even keeping Pat Brennan alive anyway? They need Mrs. Mims, the other hostage, because her father's incredibly wealthy, and they want to sell her for ransom. But Brennan is seemingly worth nothing. The real reason seems to be that Frank, the leader of the bandits, simply likes having him around. He enjoys his company, he enjoys talking to him. He even seems to want Pat to respect him and to like him.
Suppose you're wondering how come we to be keeping you around.
Am I?
Plain-faced truth is, I like you, Brennan. Ain't many men I can say that about.
It results in a really bizarre and interesting dynamic, which certain critics have, quite unsurprisingly, read as homoerotic.
You got a wife up on your place, Brennan?
No.
Should have. Ain't right for a man to be alone.
They say that.
Well, I ought to know.
Well, on the bright side, everything now smells of blackcurrant and cherry. Very good. The Tortilla was adapted from a short story by Elmore Leonard, who many people might already have heard of as several of his novels have been adapted for other famous films. Another iconic western from the 1950s was also based on a short story of his, 3:10 to Yuma, and both films take place in the same part of Arizona, with characters frequently mentioning, and indeed in some cases travelling to, a town called Contention.
You're going to stop on the main road to Contention, 1 mile this side.
Which is kind of where the video essay series title got its name, because I think it's kind of cool and weird and funny that there's just a town called Contention. We're going to finish up by talking about Man of the West, which is one of the greatest westerns of all time. The 1958 film is directed by Anthony Mann and stars Gary Cooper. It's about Link Jones, who we are first introduced to in this incredible profile shot where the film's title, Man of the West, appears alongside him. In this image, he appears to be everything you could want from the archetypal Western hero, played by the iconic Western actor Gary Cooper, who just a few years ago had a huge success with the film High Noon. He's certainly dressed for the part, and looks good on a horse, and yet the entire rest of the film is going to be spent interrogating this image and ripping it apart. The film is based on a novel called The Border Jumpers, and it could have kept the same name. However, by choosing the title Man of the West, it seems almost as if the filmmakers want to suggest that this film is intended to serve as a comment not just on this specific hero, but on the heroes of westerns more generally, effectively serving as an interrogation of the entire archetype. Link is looking for a school teacher to bring back to the community of Good Hope where he now lives. However, as soon as we see him arrive in town, we get a sense of his deep discomfort with modernity and civilization. When he first sees a steam train, he jumps back in fear, which hardly seems the appropriate response for a rugged, masculine Western hero. Then a certain amount of comedy is made out of the fact that he is far too tall to fit in the train's seats. On Link's journey, a group of bandits attack the train and attempt to hold it up. Instead of grabbing a gun and heroically taking down all the villains, Link pretty quickly ends up being knocked unconscious, and is rendered somewhat useless in this scene. He, along with a saloon singer called Billy and a gambler called Sam, are abandoned out in the wilderness. Looking for a place to shelter, they come across an old abandoned farmhouse. But as they enter, in a fantastic scene that feels more akin to a horror movie than a western, out of the shadows, bandits emerge.
Come in.
It soon becomes apparent that these are the very same bandits that held up their train, and we find out that they are indeed the same group of bandits that Link himself was once a part of in a former life.
What happened to your head?
And they are led by the vicious and terrifying Doc Tobin, played brilliantly by Lee J. Cobb.
Hello, Link.
In what has to be one of the greatest villain roles in any western.
We were big. Don't you remember?
I remember.
You were my property. What did you go off and leave me for?
It's implied, if not necessarily stated, that effectively what Tobin does is every time he murders a group of people, if there's a child left behind, he'll often adopt them and then raise them to be one of his bandits. However, as the story unfolds, it becomes apparent that Link was not just a brainwashed young victim, but also an active, gleeful and winning participant. For many years, he too was a bandit, going from town to town, leaving dead and terrified victims in his wake.
Your man used to be with me. We rode together, killed together. Did he ever tell you that?
This becomes most unavoidably apparent partway through, after Cooley, a young member of Doc Tobin's gang, humiliated Billy and forced her to strip in front of the gang, whilst holding a knife to Link's neck. After this, Link starts a fight with him in revenge.
He might give you a little tussle if you let him use his knife. He's pretty good with a knife.
It soon becomes apparent that Link isn't fighting Cooley out of self-preservation or to defend Billy's honour, but instead is deriving a sense of sadistic glee from it.
How does it feel, huh? I'm gonna kill you!
We can see a sense of viciousness in him that's frankly almost chilling. This is honestly some of the greatest acting that Cooper did in his entire career.
I can't do it.
So it seems to be the case that Mann is taking the iconic image of the classic Western hero and showing him to be ill-equipped to handle modern society, and someone with a history of brutal, sadistic violence. In a way, Man of the West foreshadows the later work of Sam Peckinpah and the other revisionist westerns that would come out in the 1960s and 70s. As well as asking us to question the role of the archetypal Western hero, Man of the West also asks us to question how Western stories tend to be framed, and why they tend to center on the characters that they do. For instance, at one point in the film, a Mexican woman is gunned down.
Lady, we're not going to hurt you!
While tragic and haunting in the moment, this is treated by the narrative as a fairly minor occurrence, and we soon move on to the hero's showdown with the villains. However, later on, her husband arrives, by which time most of the audience would likely have forgotten the woman's death.
Juanita! Juanita!
The sequence ends with a wide shot where we see Link riding away, while we are still forced to hear the grief of the man mourning for his wife.
Juanita!
We are now forced to ask ourselves why these characters are considered peripheral, why they aren't at the center of these stories. Anyway, that's it. I'm going to stop talking about westerns now. If this feels like an abrupt and weird ending, it's because I didn't write a script. So yeah, I think this is over now. So yeah, please watch my other videos, and please like this video and maybe share it if you liked it, and also subscribe to the channel if you want more content such as this. Actually, it's not so much going to be more content like this. There's going to be better content than this. This was just a sort of easy, lazy video that I wanted to make. Anyway, I should probably record like another outro, but I'm not gonna. I'm gonna force myself. I'm gonna stop the recording and I'm going to have to end it like that. This is how the video is going to have to end. My future self's going to be really mad at me that I didn't record something else other than me rambling like this. But yeah, this is over now. We're done.